A man strapped to a chair inside a South London warehouse, wires attached to his body, a car battery sitting on the floor beside him, and a room full of men watching like they were attending a business meeting. That is how the Richardson Gang handled disagreements. They called them trials. They had charges read out loud. They had verdicts delivered. And then they had punishment. Except the punishment was not a fine. It was not community service. It was electricity running through your body until you passed out. It was pliers gripping your teeth and ripping them from your gums. It was a 6-inch nail being hammered through your foot into the wooden floor beneath you. And for years, not a single victim said a word. This is the story of the torture gang that ruled South London, and the silence that protected them for far too long. South London in the 1960s. Picture the streets of Camberwell and Peckham, working-class neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone, where the local pub was the center of the community, and where reputation meant everything. This was a world where men handled problems themselves, where calling the police made you a target, where the wrong word to the wrong person could change your entire life. And sitting at the top of that world were two brothers, Charlie and Eddie Richardson. Now look, the Richardsons did not come from nothing. Their father had been involved in criminal activity before them, but the brothers, they took it somewhere else entirely. Charlie was the brains, cold, calculating, and terrifyingly smart. Eddie was the muscle, volatile, unpredictable, and always ready for violence. Together, they built an empire that stretched across South London and beyond. On paper, they were legitimate businessmen. They ran scrap metal yards and mining companies. They had offices and employees and accountants. From the outside, the Richardson brothers looked like entrepreneurs who had done well for themselves. Respectable even. But behind that front was something much darker. The Richardsons controlled South London through fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from a single violent act. The kind of fear that seeps into an entire community over years. The kind that makes grown men cross the street when they see certain faces. The kind that keeps mouths shut even when the police come asking questions. And at the center of that fear was a warehouse, a building in South London where the Richardson Gang conducted what they called their courts. Picture a large industrial space, concrete floors, metal walls, no windows. In the middle of the room, a single chair bolted to the ground. Surrounding that chair, other seats arranged like a jury box. And at the front, a table where Charlie Richardson himself would sit, acting as judge. When someone crossed the gang, when they owed money, when they talked too much, when they did anything the Richardsons considered disloyal, they were brought to this warehouse. And what happened inside those walls still makes hardened detectives uncomfortable to discuss. The electric shock treatment was their signature. A hand-cranked generator connected to metal clips. Those clips attached to the most sensitive parts of the victim's body. And then the handle turned, sending current through them while the room watched in silence. But electricity was only the beginning. Teeth were pulled with pliers, not quickly, slowly, one at a time. while the victim was fully conscious and restrained. Toes were crushed with bolt cutters. Feet were nailed to the floor with 6-inch nails hammered through the arch. Some victims had their wounds cauterized with a blowtorch so the bleeding would stop and the torture could continue. And all of this happened in a formal setting. Charges were read aloud like a real courtroom. Evidence was presented. The victim was given a chance to speak in their own defense. And then the verdict came down. Always guilty. Always followed by punishment. The man running these sessions alongside Charlie was Francis Fraser. They called him Mad Frankie Fraser, and that nickname was not given lightly. Fraser had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison. He had been certified insane multiple times. He was exactly the kind of person you wanted enforcing your rule through violence because he genuinely enjoyed the work. Now here is what made the Richardson Gang different from other criminal organizations of that era. The Kray twins operated in East London at the same time. They were violent, they were feared, but their violence was often public. It was about reputation and spectacle. When Ronnie Kray shot George Cornell in a crowded pub, everyone knew. That was the point. The Richardsons operated differently. Their violence happened behind closed doors. It was systematic. It was organized. It was designed not just to punish, but to send a message that spread through whispers. You never knew who might be taken to that warehouse. You never knew if the person sitting next to you at the pub was reporting back to the brothers. That uncertainty was the real weapon, and it worked. For years, victims of the Richardson Gang refused to cooperate with police. Men who had been tortured for hours, who had teeth missing and scars they would carry for life, looked detectives in the eye and said nothing happened. Some denied even knowing who the Richardsons were. Others admitted they had been hurt but claimed it was unrelated. Accidents, bar fights, anything but the truth. The fear ran that deep because speaking meant death. Not quick death either. The kind of death that came after another visit to that warehouse. The kind where your family might be next. The Richardsons had made examples of enough people that the entire community understood the cost of talking. So, nobody talked. Until March 1966. Mr. Smith's club in Catford, South London. A gambling club that had become neutral territory of sorts. Different criminal factions would meet there, do business there, settle disputes there. On the night of March 7th, something went wrong. Eddie Richardson was at the club that night. So was Frankie Fraser. So were members of a rival faction. What started as tension turned into violence. A fight broke out. Guns were drawn. Shots were fired. By the end of the night, one man was dead, another was dying, and both Eddie Richardson and Frankie Fraser had been shot. This was not a quiet warehouse torture session. This was a public shootout in a crowded club. There were witnesses everywhere. And suddenly, the Richardson Gang was exposed in a way they had never been before. Eddie was arrested at the hospital where he was being treated for his gunshot wound. Frankie Fraser was picked up shortly after. And once the police had those two in custody, something shifted. Investigators started looking harder at the rumors that had circulated for years. The stories about the warehouse, the whispers about the torture sessions, the men who had disappeared or turned up damaged and refused to explain why. With Eddie and Fraser facing serious charges, the fear started to crack. Just a little, but a little was enough. Victims began to talk. One by one, men who had stayed silent for years started telling police what had really happened to them inside that warehouse. They described the electric shocks, the teeth pulled, the nails through their feet. They identified Charlie Richardson as the man who ran the trials. They named Frankie Fraser as the enforcer who carried out the worst of the violence. And with each new statement, the case grew stronger. In 1967, the trial began at the Old Bailey. The charges were unlike anything a British court had seen. Torture, grievous bodily harm, fraud. The prosecution laid out the entire operation, the mock trials, the systematic violence, the years of terror that had kept South London silent. Charlie Richardson was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Eddie received 10 years. Frankie Fraser got an additional 10 years on top of the time he was already serving. The torture gang that had ruled South London was finished. But the damage they left behind did not disappear with the verdicts. The victims who finally testified had to live with what had been done to them. The community that had stayed silent carried that weight. And the fear the Richardsons had built, it did not just evaporate because the brothers were behind bars. That is the thing about systematic terror. It changes people. It changes communities. It changes the way neighbors look at each other and the way victims see themselves. Even after the threat is removed, the scars remain. Charlie Richardson eventually got out of prison. He died in 2012, maintaining until the end that the torture allegations were exaggerated. Eddie died in 2015. Fraser died in 2014, having become something of a celebrity in his later years, giving interviews about his violent past like he was discussing the weather. None of them ever showed genuine remorse for what they did to the men in that warehouse. So if there is anything to take from this story, let it be this. Silence protects the wrong people. Fear is a weapon that only works when it goes unchallenged. And sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is be the first person to finally speak up. The Richardson Gang ruled through terror. They stayed in power because nobody would say what they saw. And in the end, a single night of public violence undid everything that years of hidden brutality had built. The torture warehouse is long gone. The brothers are dead, but the story remains. A reminder